Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Thank you all so much for joining us. As we get started, I would like to recognize our generous sponsors who help make this free series possible. Many thanks to LSC Architects, Ice House, Knorr Companies, and the Minnesota Star Tribune. Well, tonight we are thrilled to have with us, kicking off our new season, Lee Hawkins, the author of the riveting new novel, I Am Nobody's Slave. In March, Talk of the Stacks will return to Minneapolis Central Library with Georgia Hunter, author of the historical fiction novel, One Good Thing. Hunter's bestseller, We Were the Lucky Ones, was recently turned into a hit Hulu series. And then in June, rising literary star Katie Kitamura will discuss her new novel, Auditions. Following up on her 2021 National Book Award nominee, Intimacies, her new novel is sure to be another big hit. We, of course, would love to see you in person or online for these next free events. So please click on the link in the chat for more details. And now, please join me in welcoming Hennepin County Library Director, Scott Dimstra. Good evening, Scott.
Good evening, Christy, and thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here at Talk of the Stacks. And thanks to all of you, local readers and library lovers, for joining us online. As we begin 2025, I'd like to take a moment to celebrate some of the successes of the year that just ended and share some fun facts about the Hennepin County Library. Here's some numbers for you. 4.5 million visits to our 41 libraries. Out of those visits, 533,000 active library card holders. That's a 9% increase from the previous year. Within all of those visits and library card holders, just under 12 million checkouts, 11.8 million items checked out at our libraries. And within those checkouts, there's stories of the educational programs that we offer to students in our area. Homework help tutoring across 18 of our libraries, and the Let's Read initiative that helps students get proficient in reading at grade level has expanded to 8 libraries, with our Pure Botano library becoming the most recent addition to the program. So it's an incredible legacy to build on, and we're truly excited to work with our library friends in the new year to build upon the abundant success of 2024. And now it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's guest. Tonight's moderator, Lissa Jones, is a culture coach, thought leader, and host of the podcast Black Market Reads. She also serves as the interim executive director for the Givens Foundation for African American Literature. Our guest of honor, Lee Hawkins, is a celebrated investigative journalist, podcaster, and nonfiction writer. Hawkins was a 2022 Pulitzer Prize finalist as a lead reporter on a series about the Tulsa Massacre of 1921 for the Wall Street Journal, where he has worked for 19 years. He's a 5-time winner of the National Association of Black Journalists Salute to Excellence Award and has received multiple fellowships. Recently, he created a public radio podcast, What Happened in Alabama, and released his first memoir, I Am Nobody's Slave, How Uncovering My Family's History Set Me Free. In this new book, Hawkins details growing up in Maplewood and how past traumas from enslavement to the Jim Crow shaped and influenced successive generations of his family. Kirkus Review recently praised the debut memoir as harrowing and insightful, a profound work about the Black experience and white oppression. It is my great pleasure to welcome moderator Lissa Jones and the guest of honor Lee Hawkins to Talk of the Stacks.
Thank you, Scott. And Lee Hawkins, welcome to Talk of the Stacks.
Thanks for having me.
I'm delighted you're here. Congratulations on your recent book. And because it is so recent, could you do us a favor and put a little bit of context together for our listening audience and our watching viewers?
Yes, I wanted to clarify that I left the Wall Street Journal in 2022, and I've been doing a lot of podcast work since then and working on promo for I Am Nobody's Slave, which is really a investigation that I started when I was at the Wall Street Journal. I started around 2014. I started to grow curious about my family history, which was kind of a lifelong question, which I think there are many African Americans who can relate to, wanting to know your lineage, despite the fact that there were so many attempts to steal our lineage from us and knowledge of our lineage. And so when Ancestry.com came out, I started to dig in. I took a DNA test. My father was from Alabama. He was my best friend. And he didn't talk a lot about Jim Crow, growing up in Jim Crow. He was born in 1948 in a little town called Greenville, Alabama. And through my childhood, he wouldn't talk about it, but sometimes I knew that there had been things that had affected him from growing up under Jim Crow. And one of the reasons I knew it was because sometimes he would have nightmares, and I'd ask him what he was dreaming about, and he'd just say, Alabama, son, Alabama. And so once we started to get access to the tools to be able to dig down deep into DNA, and I had the investigative skills as a reporter at that time to really be able to find out more about my family history. Then I ended up doing about 3 years of preliminary research, which was just about me, and wanting to know for the benefit of myself and also for the benefit of my dad, who, previous generations hadn't shared a lot with him about our family history. And so once I started digging in, I couldn't stop. And about 3 years into that process, I got the book deal for I Am Nobody's Slave. And I worked simultaneously at the Wall Street Journal while I was researching and writing that. And what this really has become is a investigation into 400 years of American history to see how enslavement, Jim Crow, the Great Migration, and integration affected my family. So it is really a saga about an American family, and it starts with my childhood, the first 0 to 17 years. And then we go back to my great-great-grandparents, Charity Pugh and Isaac Blakey, and we start to go into what their lives were like, and it explains why I was raised the way I was in many ways. And so Lissa, I see slavery, Jim Crow, and the American experience of Black Americans in modern society in every element and every faction of society. I see it now that I've done this work. It's changed my life.
I just can't thank you enough for writing the book. It is absolutely timely. It would have been timely at any time because our history is reminiscent of our past. Can we talk a little bit about the title, Lee? The title, I Am Nobody's Slave, is really striking. What does it signify in the context of your personal journey and in the broader themes of your book?
Oh, wow. Well, good question. I mean, it really, the way that the name came about was growing up in Minnesota. I grew up in a town called Maplewood, Minnesota. I'm sure there's a lot of people from Maplewood who are probably on this call now. And my family was blessed to also be a big part of the Black community, mainly the Rondo community, but I also had some friends over on the north side too, cousins who went to North Minneapolis High School. I went to North St. Paul High School. And so when I was growing up, I was called the N-word a lot, in the I would say 95% white community. A lot of times I was the only Black kid in my class, and I think that I had to learn to deal with it, and I think it didn't necessarily deter me, but it was something that was very real in my life. And then also, we talk in this book a lot about white oppression, but I think one of the more controversial aspects of the book, depending on who you talk to, is that I also talk about Black oppression. And the name I Am Nobody's Slave actually came out of a therapy session that I went through with my parents in the early 2000s, where I actually said, I'm nobody's slave. Okay. And that was in reaction to some preliminary resistance about corporal punishment and the fact that I received the belt, like many people of all races in America received the belt, because the belt is foundational to the American experience Many children were beaten. Many children are beaten. It's still legal in 17 states to beat kids in schools, in public schools. And so, first of all, I want to get that out there, that people, clutch their pearls when they start to talk about people talking about getting whipped as kids. And the truth of it is that America is founded on violence. And the root of our founding was violence. And, this book really goes in a devastating and astonishing way, in the way that I was astonished, shows how that's inextricably tied to the American experience. And so really initially, because I was called the N-word, I initially wanted this book to be called I Am Nobody's N-word. But at the time, my publisher, my very supportive editor, Tracy Sherrod, who was at HarperCollins at the time, and I, we kind of said, well, we better change it. But the key was that I had made this statement, I am nobody's slave, in that therapy session. And the whole idea of it, Lissa, is that in America, there are perceptions of what a Black person should be. And a lot of times it depends on the person who is actually projecting their definition of Blackness on a Black American. And that happens inside our community. It happens external to our community. And early on in the book, I talk a lot about growing up and being caught in this quagmire of what does it mean to be Black. On one hand, and since they say it on the rap records and the FCC has no problem about it, I'm going to say it here. I was torn between the real nigga and the Black excellence reality of who I am and who my ancestors and family and church and community wanted me to be. And I think a lot of young Black people, and particularly our boys, are constantly dealing with having to navigate through identity because of the fact that so much of our pop culture and everything around us is telling us that we are and that we should strive to be an N-word. And what does that really mean? That means living down to the stereotypes that people have used to define Blackness. And that means some Black people included. And I'll give you one example. I know when I was a kid, I did pretty well, not too well in math, but I did pretty well in reading and writing. And I remember when I would get my A's on my paper, sometimes, I would put them away in my backpack, or because I didn't want people to know that I got the A, because I didn't want to be called acting white. So there was a very deep sort of commitment among my social circle and outside of my social circle that a Black boy needed to almost exemplify and glorify ignorance in order to be considered a real Black person. And so, and actually a real NIGGA. And the key here is that once I started to get into this research, Lissa, I was able to see where that came from. I studied the Alabama Slave Code of 1852, which was what my great-great-grandmother Charity would have lived under as a girl. And what that meant was there was a community of people in Greenville, Alabama, white people who were appointed to be the slave patrols. And what that meant was they weren't police officers, but every white person, every white man between the ages of 18 and 45 in this town had to do one night a week of slave patrol. That means everybody had a whip and everybody had a gun. And there were rules that Black people had to follow, both Black people who were enslaved and those who we called free. But if there's anybody who is Black who is listening and has been told that their ancestors were free, that's not true. Your ancestors were not free in America, okay? Because everybody had to live under the auspices of the slave code. And what I found, what was the slave code, Lissa? The slave code was really a set of rules that said, for instance, if you're Black and you're caught reading or writing, then that meant that you needed to get 39 to 100 lashes. If you were Black and you had 4 people in a group, more than 4 people without a white person present, that meant that you needed to get 39 to 100 lashes. And so whipping was built into the society that my great-great-grandmother, who was just a few generations from my father, lived in. She was beaten, she was raped. There were all kinds of things that she went through as a little girl who was enslaved for the first 25 years of her life and then lived the rest of her life. We estimate 60 to 70 years enslaved in under Jim Crow apartheid. And so my point is that doing this research helped me understand, wait a minute, it's a crime for me to write a book, to be a Black man and write a book? Well, if that's the case, I'm nobody's slave. I'm going to live in defiance of the slave codes that were projected on us and that many of us, unfortunately, have internalized as our own existence. You know, many of us who today still believe, for instance, that Black children need to be whipped, that it's good for Black children to be whipped. That is a colonizers, enslaver tradition that was brought over from the United Kingdom. But the truth is that saying, Lissa, we're not free until all of us are free. I don't believe that. I'm free now, and I'm going to continue to push to be free because I don't think all of us want to be free. And that's Black people, and that's people across our society who are still holding on to a lot of the old way of doing things, the old America, which was the colonizer's way. And I live in defiance of that as a modern abolitionist.
Race has a texture and a charge, according to my friend Resma Menachem. And what you said was a whole lot of word, Lee. Let's just take a second, if we can, just take a deep breath, because I hear you and I see you. And I think a lot about the pathologizing of Black families and how many times when I've been doing my research, your interviewers go to the violence in the book, but they don't speak about the love between you and your father, or the love between you and your family, or the way that that love might have looked like violence in order to protect you. Can you talk to us about that?
Most definitely. I think that it's very hard for people who grew up outside the African American experience to understand. I had one friend who was Black, but he was adopted by white people. And he once said to me, how can you say that someone who beat you loved you? And I think that that's a fair question because we live in a society that is not necessarily rooted in critical thinking, especially today. You know, it's either Black or white, no pun intended, an oversimplification of a very complicated experience in America in which 12 generations of our ancestors went through slavery and 5, including my father, lived under Jim Crow, which was not segregation as we were taught, but it was a crime against humanity in which my grandfather and both of my father's grandfathers were murdered in Alabama. And so I didn't know this when I was a kid, but my father and my parents were very hyper cautious and many times very afraid of what might happen to me because of my activism. The same activism that you see now is who I was before. And there are a lot of people out there listening who remember the Lee Hawkins with the funny flat top that I used to wear and how outspoken I was. Even at that time, you know, sometimes called a racist because I spoke out about racism. And so I think that the fear that my parents had for me was that this boy is so audacious, he is so outspoken, and he is excelling in areas, not basketball, not football, not track, but in things like debate and forensics and student leadership. And I think that that was really hard for a lot of people of all races to accept because once again, I didn't fit inside of the mold of what a Black boy should be. And so there were a lot of belt whippings for various reasons, you know, and I think if you read the book, you'll see that I outlined all of the reasons for the specific incidents that I talked about. what the reasoning was for those spankings, as they were called, as well as my little sister Tiffany, who was a very courageous and brave woman who also took a stand, against this idea that Black children must be whipped in order for us to be able to prosper and be productive, which is a holdover from the juvenile justice system from the early 1900s, where I even found statements in the juvenile justice record saying, well, we must whip all the Black um, children because they lack the capacity to be reasoned with. And so once again, because that was the prevailing wisdom of the society, then that was the internal wisdom of many of the Black families, including mine, who believed that the whip was something that had to be used to scare us so that we would not go out and get killed by the police or killed in our own community. Because at the time, I was a child of the 80s, and the homicide crisis in the Black community, particularly among young Black boys my age, was serious. And I lost friends to the homicide crisis. I lost a friend in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And so the climate of fear was something that was very real. And I think that raising a Black boy in America is one of the most complicated dynamics that a Black man like my father can face. And if we want to use hypervisible examples, I had a very omnipresent father who was just as present as Joe Jackson was over Michael Jackson, or Roy Jones Jr., who is my family member, was over Roy Jones, or Floyd Mayweather, or Prince, to use someone from our backyard. He had a very, very complicated relationship with his very loving father, who was somebody who shared the gift of music with him, but also kicked him out of his house when he was a teenager. And I think that a lot of it does have to do with the political, social, and economic reality that we are in this society, and also the lineage of those men who did not get the opportunities that their sons got, and all of them, my father included, were grandchildren of enslaved people. And even whether they knew that or not. And I think it's important for us to recognize that slavery played a much more profound role in the socialization of Black Americans and foundational Black Americans and Black American families than we want to accept. And I think also across the way, for people who like to challenge the idea that slavery could affect us today by saying, well, you weren't a slave, and nobody here owned slaves. So how can you say that it affects us? Well, it affects us in many ways through, and we don't have to go all the way back to slavery. I can just go back to my father, who was born in 1948 under Jim Crow, which ended only 60 years ago, which was a crime against humanity. And so all of that led my loving father and my loving family to feel like they had to do this, and they felt like they were doing it out of love for us. And I think, and the last thing I'll say on it is, I hold no ill will towards people who define what I've written as just something that is a book about corporal punishment, especially because I think it's very hard to digest, especially the second part of the book. Some people will say, oh, it was so hard to read about the belt whippings you received as a child. But the much harder part is to read the hard, cold truth about our country's history and the truth of what America was, based on the reality and not the reality that we were taught. We love our country. I was born on the Minot, North Dakota Air Force Base. My father, who was not born equal to a white person, still enlisted in the Vietnam era Air Force. And so we love our country devoutly. And I see a parallel between my country, my relationship with my country, and my relationship with my family, because in both, I love my country with all I had. I love my family with all I had. And one of the questions that I always had was, how is it that I have to live under the threat of the whip for me to be considered a citizen in this country and a citizen in this family? And I think that it's important to read this book with the understanding of the power that it brings for helping people understand American history through one family and the complexities and the nuances that led my father and Troy Maxton from Fences to feel that their children must be perfect and must redeem the sacrifices of the previous generations. It's a very complex idea, and while it's very easy to oversimplify it and just say, oh, this is about Lee Hawkins talking about corporal punishment, if you're really going to be true to yourself as a student and someone who wants to learn about American history, go through and read the part about my great-great-grandparents and what they actually lived through and what their lives were like. And it will help you understand why my life in many instances was the way it was.
Thank you. I'm Lissa Jones in conversation with Lee Hawkins, the author of the latest I Am Nobody's Slave: How Uncovering My Family's History Set Me Free. Thank you, Lee. I'm thinking about your audience. Who was your intended audience, and what impact do you hope your story has on them?
My audience was Black Americans, not to the exclusion of people outside our community. It wasn't that I said, oh, I want to exclude white people, or I want to exclude our Latino brothers and sisters, or our Asian brothers and sisters. But it was that I wanted this book to be about Black people who were foundational to this country's experience. And also I wanted our brothers and sisters who are immigrants to read this book as well, Black immigrants, so that they could understand the extreme amount of tenacity, resilience, and power that Black people who are foundational to this country showed and exhibited in order for them to come to this country and have equal rights. And not just the Black immigrants, but all immigrants, the immigrants especially and particularly who came after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and benefited from all of the people who were lynched, all of the people who marched, all of the people who had family members murdered, and were able to get equal access to housing, banking, every aspect, at least on paper. We know that there's still a lot of racial disparity and inequality in this country, but we also know that Black people at every turn of promise that we can be proud of about the American story, Black people were in the front lines, whether that be emancipation, whether that be women's suffrage, whether that be Dr. King and the movement that he and Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks and so many people led to make America, to finally become America, in which liberty and justice for all was a right that everybody in the Constitution, which is the most egalitarian document that I know of, said that it stated that everybody can participate in this democracy. That is the goal. And it was Black people who led that. And so I wanted people and my Black people to understand what happened before they got here, and to have a fundamental understanding of the different challenges that the political, social, and economic reality that undergirded, 1619 all the way to 1964. It was legal, right, for white people to be superior, right? And so it's been, racial equality is a very new concept in America. It's 60 years old. And so this idea that Black people would have equal rights is very new. And because of that, we're still getting used to it. And we still have people who are starting to see equality as inequality or oppression on their part because they were not raised with this history to understand that America was not a meritocracy. As a matter of fact, all the way up to 1964, 20% of the population could not compete on equal footing with the white person. And there was all kinds of racial violence that was codified by our government that undergirded that. And that was how this was enforced and executed. And as a result, many of us lost family members and were overtaken a lot of times by grief, which had a toll. And Black people carried it and have carried it to the point that a lot of the people who even read my book have had no idea, what I lived through as a kid and what my family had lived through and how tough we were and just how awesome we were because we never talked about it. We never talked about the things that we went through. And I wanted Black people in particular to read this and to start to decolonize ourselves from the hold that the slave codes still have on many of us in our minds, including myself. I struggled many times with a force that was so powerful of white supremacy that I didn't even know that it had overtaken me as strongly as it did. And some examples are, not me, but I saw colorism when I was a kid. I saw a lot of it. We used to sit around and we called it capping. Some people call it roasting. The old people call it playing the dozens. And I remember, back in the day when people would play the dozens and they would say, "You're so Black that," and it was a pejorative, stigmatizing thing to say about someone, but it was rooted in white supremacy. And then also this idea of the baby mama, just different Black men who I knew who had children out of wedlock and would think that somehow that because they were Black, that was why they had children with different women. And really that wasn't it. We were not the baby father that people think we were in terms of the stereotype that's projected upon Black men as, unworthy fathers, when the fact is the CDC has even proven that Black men are more likely to be in the lives of their children than men of any other race. It was actually the original baby daddy who was, in my case, his name was Jesse Pugh, on his plantation, because he is my we believe third or fourth great grandfather, who I'm related to because of the sexual assault of my great great grandmother. And when I looked at the will, I saw that there were children besides her, and some of those children were very likely from men from the Pugh family. And so, if you really think about this legacy of Black of men not taking responsibility and having multiple children with different women, that was an enslaver concept. That wasn't our concept. That was Thomas Jefferson. And I know that because my friend Shannon Lanier is his sixth great grandson, and he is my color. And that's just the truth. The truth of our beautiful country is that it is beautiful and complicated. Our history is dark and it is also bright. And we have to be able to have a more complicated and informed and responsible form of American patriotism. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted Black people to have that foundation.
Thank you. That as an interviewer, there's so much to respond to. So one of the things I'm going to grab onto is that in our country, we have a conversation about whether or not enslavement, and I think there's a very serious differentiation you make between an enslaved person and a slave that I would like to get into in a different conversation. But I think we were hearing about meritocracy and manifest destiny, and these are the myths that exist from the founding of this country. So it is not without understanding that enslavement has everything to do with what's happening today. How did you deal with the emotional toll of learning what you learned? Or
You
are you
know,
dealing with it, I guess?
well, I think I compartmentalized to some extent, had a lot of practice with that because not only am I a reporter who been for 30 years, who's had to cover a lot of really difficult stories, but also I come from a legacy, like many Black families, where we had to just keep going. There was no real um, idea of, even the idea of therapy is still, very controversial depending on who you talk to. For me, I was blessed to be able to work with a therapist. And it was actually my father who recommended that when I was at a very dark place while in the writing of this story. And I was telling him, I can't talk about this stuff with everybody because it's so painful to hear about the fact that I've had a murder in my family every generation since 1837, as you'll read in the book. And I don't want to give too much of the book away, but yeah, there were some real painful things. And, the beauty of my father was that he was a very, he held a master's degree in psychology, and he was heavily influenced by a guy, a psychiatry professor by the name of Dr. John Taborn, who was there in Minneapolis, who talked about the roots of colonization in my father's graduate school classes. And this happened to coincide with not too long after I had confronted my father about the problem that I had, and my sister Tiffany had confronted our father about the problem that we had with the fact that we were the belt was used so prolifically in our childhood, and our father, took that journey with us and went to counseling and all kinds of things because he loved us so profoundly and deeply, but also because he understood American history through the lens of being an educated man. And so for me, how I dealt with it was through going to therapy. And I work with a therapist his name is Dr. Lee Jenkins, and he's actually a Jim Crow survivor himself. So he has the cultural competency and the historical competency to understand all of these very complicated issues. And I worked, really hard to be able to feel those emotions that were required for me to put this down on the page. And, there were days that I didn't get out of bed. I'm going to tell you, I mean, it was a very excruciating, grueling process to try and do this up against, sometimes opposition from family members who were concerned about what the people across the street might think or something, and kind of willing to stay in bondage and to stay ignorant if it means that the people across the street have to know that we were like the millions of children across America, that we received the belt. So that was one way I dealt with it. And the other way I dealt with it was I reached out, I took the DNA test and found out that 18% of my DNA was European. And I wanted to really, really do a very deep dive into this research to give you the best book that I could give you. And so what happened was I ended up contacting the other side, and I have a lot of cousins who are white, who I'm related to because of slavery, and Donna Shapani, Gail Luker Allred, Lloyd Pugh, Jim Pugh, and it turned out that Jim Pugh actually was a guy who I had worked with uh, over, many decades ago. He was a PR guy for the Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce, and I was a young reporter, and I used to have to call him every month to get the job numbers. And so we liked each other from the beginning, but we had no idea that we were related. Number one, because he had my grandmother's maiden name, but I thought he was from Wisconsin, and I didn't know anything about my grandmother really And I didn't know that the early parts of my family were in Virginia. And so when I was on Facebook one day and I found out, I saw him say that he had just returned from Virginia to learn more about his family history. I contacted him. We compared notes and we found out that we were from the same line of pews. And this is where the complicated part comes. I would say that a lot of the healing and the parts that helped it and made it easier for me to go through this story was from the support of Jim Pugh and from the support of some of my cousins who were on the other side of slavery, who said, hey, let's study this together. Let's find out about our family's legacy on both sides of the Civil War. We can't change the past, but we can certainly change the present and the future. And that's in this book too, is that an incredible reality and open that we need to be open to critical thinking and what I call family unity through roots, family unity through understanding roots and experiences. And that's my system called the Future Method, which I use to help people who are studying their own families find healing.
Thank you. We have about 3 to 4 minutes, but probably closer to 3 before the audience will before we'll present the audience's questions. I'm thinking about, while the book doesn't necessarily offer forgiveness, it does provide understanding. And what role do you believe forgiveness plays in healing from generational trauma?
I would push back on that. The book does explicitly talk about forgiveness, and I 100%. And I think that fundamentally at my core, I'm a student of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have been since I was a kid, and nonviolent social change is critical to me. And I've turned it on its head. And what I mean by that is I look at nonviolent social change and the promise that Black Americans made to white Americans that we would protest against a system of white supremacy without using violence. And I, in my activism and in my writing, extend that to wanting to see my own community extend that same love to itself, and to extinguish this idea of belittling the value of Black life on the same level that the KKK belittled it, so that means our young Black men, even though we struggle sometimes when we look in the mirror, is to understand that when our self-worth is deteriorated, it's easy to take the life of someone who is a mirror image of us. And when our self-worth is deteriorated and we're beset by trauma from previous generations, it's easy to take that out on our child, with the belt, or domestic violence that we see in our community, and the way that we've sometimes not respected our women. And this is, once again, everything that I talk about is not about Black pathology. It's about the pathology of the prevailing culture, okay, the prevailing governmentally codified system. And what I'm trying to do with my work is to tell my people, you know what, we don't have to emulate that. And we can break away from that and love ourselves in the way that, I was raised in a community in a strong village where there was so much love. And that is, for me, the ideal community that I want us all to be collectively. And so I would say forgiveness of my culture, my country, forgiveness of my anybody who I ever perceived who did anything wrong. It was fundamentally to my healing. But I do think, and I do explain this with the Future Method, that anybody who uses genealogy to heal family traumas can do that, but you can also give yourself permission to do it at your own pace. And you do not have to forgive people before you're ready. Do the work and have the conversation after you dig and find out what happened, but you don't have to forgive anybody until you're ready.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Forgiveness is a choice. If you had 1 or 2 things that you want everybody to take away from this, what would it be? Or what would they be?
I think, first of all, thank you. I want everybody who has tuned into this call. I mean, this call, and I know I talked a lot, um, but it's so important to get the story right because it's very easy to take this story out of context. And I want everybody to read this book in context. That means read the whole book. And if you can't read the whole book, because I know we live in an ADHD culture, um, then listen to the podcast. To the audiobook. I narrated it, and I did my best to try to make it as entertaining as possible. But really read this book in this story about one Black American family and even the white family members on the other side to get a very good sense of American history. This is probably one of the best approaches to teaching American history through strong narrative of one family's experience. And so there's that. And the final thing that I want to say is this. There will be Black people out there who say, well, why did you have to go into all of that? That wasn't my experience. And you know what? That wasn't your experience. This book is called I Am Nobody's Slave, How Uncovering My
Are you with us, Lee?
So sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Welcome back. If you're okay with it, we'll jump right into the audience Q&A. Is that okay?
Yes, great.
Welcome back. Thank you. Did you ever have second thoughts about sharing your family's history and secrets with the world? If so, what made you ultimately decide to move forward with telling your story?
Well, this isn't all my story. This is one aspect of my story that deals with the intergenerational effect of trauma on my family. And I didn't share all of my family secrets. I think that this was, pretty mild in comparison to a lot of the things that um, we experienced. And there were a lot of things that I left out of the book. But I did think that it was important for me to be able to always take control of my story and recognize that things that affected me were fair game for me to write about. And so if something affected me, it's there you go. Then it's my story and I'm going to take control over it. So did I have second thoughts? I think people who know me know that I'm just maladjusted enough to have the courage to push forward and to tell the truth, because I feel like as a journalist, I got in this field for that reason, to really try to always push the iconoclastic story and to not recycle and rehash all of the wonderful writing that's already been done about slavery. There's a lot of people who write about slavery and Jim Crow and they fixate on Black bodies. And I think we've had a lot of great work around Black bodies. I was much more interested in the way that the terror against the Black body affected the Black mind. And so, yes, there were times that maybe I had second thoughts because I love my family so devoutly that I wanted to make sure, that I infused the right amount of balance and perspective, especially to be fair to my father, and show his evolutionary journey. But I did decide in those moments, whenever I did have second thoughts, first of all, I prayed because I am a Christian man. And I also knew that I was on the right side of history. Right. I know that even if people don't get it now, it may be long gone that people, after I'm gone, that people start to realize how radical and revolutionary of a concept it is to respect the bodily integrity of Black children in America. And so that, and also because I love my family so devoutly, love is a very difficult thing. I mean, if you love someone, then you have to be willing to go through the pain that goes through love. And the part of the pain that goes through love is liberation. Freedom isn't free. And what that means is if you love your family, then you will expose the traumas in the ways that white supremacy was internalized to affect successive generations in order to protect those who come after me. I would hope that this book will make America and the family system a better place to be for many, many children in my family and future generations. I want every person who is a part of my lineage or my people to feel empowered to be their authentic version of who they are, not an Oreo, not an acting white because they get their PhD or something. I want them to be who they are. And for me, that trumped anything in terms of any kind of guilt I would feel or any kind of feeling that I wasn't doing the right thing. I know I'm doing the right thing. And I know that I stayed, in prayer. And I feel like this to me is my divine, my contribution to pay some rent on the planet.
Thank you. I didn't get a chance to ask you about the craft of writing. Your work is so deep and so full that an hour doesn't feel like enough, but there's a great question from the audience. How did you decide to structure the book? It balances information and research with narrative drive brilliantly.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That wasn't easy. One of the things that I could really work on as a writer is structure. It's one of the hardest things, especially for a story that was dealing with, several generations of people going back to the 1600s. And I think, I don't know how many rewrites I did. I probably did 5 or 6, probably more. The book was twice as long. And, I have another book's worth of material that really deals with the northern side of my family on the maternal side. But I'll just say this is that when you read my book, I took great pains to be a clear writer. I wasn't trying to impress you and to show you how great of a writer I am, because I'm really not that great of a writer. But what I am is really a journalist who has spent a lot of years writing for newspapers. And I think that when you write for newspapers, it forces you to write clearly and concisely and tightly, but it also kind of steals that literary power that you see, from some of the great writers, the Baldwins or the Toni Morrisons or the Maya Angelou's. I don't think that I, write with that kind of power. So I don't even try. I just try to write clear because my strength is my reporting, my ability to get to the facts and show how the facts fit together. And if you need to use a lot of flowery language to get your point, to tell your story, sometimes that might be a sign that you haven't got the story, that you haven't done the powerful reporting. And so the vivid imagery that you see in this book and all of the different examples of people's personalities and clothing and what the food smelled like, all of that was just basically from doing probably over 200 interviews and reading, reading a lot of books and just doing exhaustive reporting. So the best writing that I do comes when I've done my reporting. And that kind of compensates for my feeling that I'm not the best writer.
I don't know if I agree with that, but okay, you're the one that gets to decide. Mackenzie, how do you see this investigation helping others to get connected to their roots? Appreciate you sharing your personal journey. And this might be our last question, depending on how long.
Okay, Mackenzie. I think you read this book to look at how I studied my family and use the future method, which is, once again, we talk about uniting the family, right? And so the future method is, that's what we want to do, is to use genealogy, not to focus just on when somebody was born or when they died, but the dash in between. Let's interview grandmother about, the fire that happened in 1956 where her little brother was murdered, or sorry, where her little brother was killed, or the lynching that happened in Arkansas in 1962, where someone was murdered, and why then, to get that better understanding of why you were raised the way you were raised. That's how we want to do it. We want to be able to understand these roots and experiences.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we can get one last one. Thank you for your vulnerability and honesty in this book. These stories must have been hard to tell. How have the family members responded? Has it led to further healing?
Yeah, I would say that, well, first of all, this book was written really with my father. And, in terms of talking a lot for 4 years to my dad. And my sister Tiffany is a very strong uh, person, the bravest person I know. She is a warrior, and she has been my biggest supporter. As far as I know, my family is overwhelmingly supportive of this book. I haven't had anybody come to me, and I've had things said behind my back, but I think one of the things about it is, me, that I'm a very no nonsense person, and I have an open door policy. If you want to say something to me, say it, and just be ready to hear, to receive what I have to say back. And my great experience, my thing is that this has been a wonderful experience because I have so many family members who didn't know this history. And it's opened up a lot of opportunities for all of us to start to reflect upon some of the things that our parents went through. My father and his sisters, who were incredible Americans who went through so much under Jim Crow and still thrived, but still had a lot of pain that they packed away. And I think that for me and my first cousins on my dad's side have been so incredibly supportive. And I would say my mom sat for an interview. Both of my sisters sat for an interview. My dad, and that's a wonderful thing. I think that we have to understand that um, it's time to be courageous, and a lot of times we just can't worry about what people think, and we have to go forward with the truth. So,
Liberation isn't easy. Freedom isn't free. And thank you for the courage to write down your story.
thank you.
Lee, this has been wonderful. Please order Lee Hawkins' book, I Am Nobody's Slave. You can order it at our local bookseller, Majors and Quinn. And thank you to the Hennepin County Libraries and the Friends of the Hennepin County Libraries for bringing us the one and only Lee Hawkins.
And thank you. I want to thank everybody, because I know there are a lot of people out there who have known me since I was a little boy. They used to call me Lily. And I'm that same dude, just a little bit more evolved today. But I still, at my core, I love you all, and I'll never forget you. And I love you deeply. And Minnesota, I love you so much, even through the pain. And there's been a lot of bright spots in my experience as well. So thank you all. I love you. I adore you. Reach out to me on social media. LeeHawkinsJr.com is the website. You can find me there. God bless you all. Thank you, Lissa. Thank
Take
you.
care. Thank you, Lee. Take care.
Thank you.
Yo, it's astonishing how really they just fumbled the bag. On your kitty pride's ride through the chances they had. They went with the fad and